Many ghost sightings happen when you're all alone. Perhaps it's late and it's dark and it's super quiet and you're left questioning your own sanity and there's nobody around to ask whether they saw it too. We so often feel alone in our ghostly experiences. But in today's episode, we have 3 of your ghost stories where you didn't experience it alone. You experienced it with somebody else. And that makes these ghostly encounters even more unnerving because you can no longer just dismiss it as being a bump in the night or the need for more sleep. There's somebody else there who saw exactly what you did, and it makes it 1,000 times more real. If you're new here, hello, my name is Hearth. I'm a practicing witch, but I love ghosts and ghoulies. And this is Spirit Sundays, where we share your real ghost stories so that other people feel less alone in theirs. Today we have 3 stories that have all been submitted by my subscribers. I will leave the link to the form in the description box if you do have your own ghostly encounter. So with that being said, let's get into some of these. They are absolutely fascinating because at this point, you kind of can't dispute what you've seen when you're not the only one who's seen it. And this first story in particular opens up a whole lot of questions about what we're actually seeing. Are the ghosts we're encountering tailored specifically to us? If somebody else was to see the same thing, would they actually be looking at something totally different? This first one was submitted by Cleo. Before I knew as much about spirits as I do now, I was having a sleepover with my cousin. We were going for a walk outside in my grandparents' house late at night, and we were using flashlights. We walked around the area that my grandparents keep their dog. There are 2 fences quite close together, and the area is very wooded. I flashed the light through the area and saw a small, blue, floating, wisp-like creature that wore a hood. And so I startled. I flung my flashlight away, and I remember asking my cousin, "Did you see that?" He thought he saw a dog, which was not my grandparents' dog. I'm sure that we were seeing different interpretations of the same spirit, or maybe 2 different ones, or it could have been a genuine animal. I just didn't see it, but it was all super eerie. My grandparents' house is an older ranch-style house. And a few weeks ago, I was staying there completely by myself and heard mumbling, as if someone were watching TV even though nobody was home. The dogs often bark at nothing, and my uncle says he hears footsteps. My grandmother says she thinks it's in my head, but it's happening too often to be a coincidence. I would love to know your takes. So this one is spine-chilling because you have 2 people in the same place, looking in the same direction, seeing 2 completely different things. And it does definitely lead to that question of what was experienced here. I know what I'm leaning towards. Before I share it, feel free to put your thoughts down in the comment section and let's see if we're the same, because I'm dead curious about this. When I think of blue floating wisp-like creatures, I think of will-o-wisps. Will-o-wisps are a member of the Fae, so the fairies, the fair folk, the wee folk, the little people, there's different terms. And they are typically described as being blue floating wisp-like orbs. Some people describe them as being like balls of blue fire that float in boggy environments, in woodlands. And there's some interpretations of them. Some people say that they guide lost travelers to safety. Other people say that they lead to a phenomenon known as being pixie-led or pisky-led, depending on where you are. Now, this phenomena is where you are following what you believe to be a lantern or a person, or you're curious about what it is that you're seeing, and so you follow it. This was particularly common during the time when people were traveling via lanterns on foot or horseback, and they were often alone in the wilderness. And if you were to get turned around, there's no mobile phones, there's no telephone boxes, there's no way of anybody knowing where you are. And so you would likely be inclined to follow a fiery orb that is floating in a walking-like pace through the trees because you would believe it was another person traveling from where you came from to where you were going. And it was known as being pisky-led because often this wasn't a real person. You were actually being led to your early demise. Particularly in boggy regions, people would be led into a bog and then they would get sucked into the mud and the silt, and then they would drown, never to be seen again. Now, pisky-led isn't just carried out via will-o-wisps or spirits like this. Instead, it's also carried out more commonly now by spirits that will call your name. So you might be in the middle of a forest and you will hear your friend that you know is 100 paces in front of you calling your name from a very thick part of the woodland behind you. And it's usually either your name, or they will be calling out for help, or they will be speaking to you in a voice that sounds like somebody you know. So it might sound like your brother or your girlfriend, somebody that you would want to go to. And they try to lead you away. And when you start heading towards the sound of that voice, the voice is now further away. So you go further into the trees. The voice is now further away still. Before you know it, you've walked a mile in the wrong direction. You're turned around. You have no idea where you are and you are lost. The cure for this historically has been to turn your clothes inside out, turn a piece of clothing inside out before you start traveling, or when you realize you're being pisky-led, you would turn a glove inside out, or you would turn your socks inside out, or your jacket inside out, and it would break the enchantment so that you can then escape. So I find that really interesting that this is included here, because it's being described as a ranch-style property, and we don't really have those here. So we're talking about here potentially an American form of a will-o-wisp. And this only goes to show that while the spirits might go by different names, they are found in many different places around the world. Now, the dog I find very interesting. I have done an entire podcast episode actually a few years ago on the black shuck, which I will leave linked up here and in the description box if you want to go and check that out. Now, the black shuck is considered an omen, and it is often considered an omen of imminent death. So rather than seeing the black shuck as being the being that brings about death, I think it's much better to perceive them as being a spirit that brings about acknowledgement of death, or a pre-warning to it. So it gives a family and it gives the people the chance to be forewarned of something occurring. They act a little like the Irish banshee. So the banshee is another member of the fair folk who are linked to individual Irish families. And when a member of that family is about to die or is really ill, the family members will hear the scream or the cry of their family banshee telling them that that individual is about to die. And it's kind of a pre-warning. So the banshee themselves isn't bringing about death. They are simply pre-warning the family of what's about to happen. And something similar happens with the black shuck, which is found everywhere in the UK through different names as well as further afield. They are often seen at funerals. You will see a lone black dog sitting and watching a funeral procession. They are often seen as omens or precursors to a death, either of yourself or of a loved one or somebody that is close in that area. Some people will also see black shuck when somebody just in the vicinity is going to die and they just happen to be there at that given moment. The other thing with the black shuck as well is sometimes they are protectors. So they will guide people through woodland safely. And that's the bit that I feel like I need to be focusing on here, because the will-o-wisp, while it is often seen as being a way of tricking people, is also seen as a way of guiding people safely out. The problem is that you never know which one you're going to get. So you could get pixie-led. You could also have a will-o-wisp that's genuinely trying to help you if you've gotten lost. But the fact that we're also seeing the dog in this situation is making me think that this is probably the same spirit, and that they very well may have been attempting to guide you out of that situation, that woodland, the forest, thinking that you are traveling through and that you don't know where you are and that you're lost. And it may well be that depending on the individual, because the fair folk are very good at making themselves look different. I've experienced this myself personally. Some members of the fair folk are very proficient at what we would probably describe as shape-shifting. But in effect, it's more like a glamour. So they aren't necessarily changing their physical form. They're instead changing how their form is being perceived by other people. So if you would have resonated differently than your cousin, then you are being shown two different versions so that you will get the same end result. I think that's really, really interesting. But I mean, this place seems haunted in and of itself. We've got the footsteps. We have the dogs barking at things that aren't there. This seems like the land itself is probably exceptionally high energy. If you do have hauntings happening in the house and you also have potentially fae activity happening on the property, you're looking at a very high energy situation. But this one is so interesting to me because all of my experiences with two people seeing a haunting at the same time is that they see the same thing. So I've had it where we have seen how do I best describe it? A very, very fast humanoid figure that was made out of white light. That sounds absolutely bonkers, I know. We were walking home and it comes from our left and it kind of runs across the street in front of us at an angle, kind of going away from us. And it was so quick. It was like, bump, gone, like that. And both of us kind of stopped. And we paused for a second and we didn't say anything. And then we looked at, it's like a comedy skit. We like looked at each other and were like, did light, white light, yes, yeah, we saw the same thing. And we're like saying like bits of what we saw because we don't want to like entirely give the other person what it is that we saw. So we both like gave like half of what we saw and the other person corroborated it. That was always been my experience with things, or like I've spoken about it on the live stream, the bells with the demon territory, where you're both experiencing the same things at the same time. This is really interesting to me because it's different. And that makes it really, really cool. I mean, it's cool anyway, but I'm a ghost nerd, and so this makes it extra cool. Okay, so the next one was submitted by Eclipse. My very first ghost experience was when I was like 5 years old. Both me and my sister experienced the same thing. At the time, we were living in a home that had only one level. You had the living room, and to the left of it was the kitchen and the master bedroom. To the right, you had mine and my sister's room along with the bathroom. The first part I don't remember, but I've been told it over and over again. According to my nanny, me and my sister had always claimed that something was wrong in the part of the house our bedrooms were in. One night, me and my sister come rushing in hysterically crying, telling her that the living room was the safe space and the part where the hallway and our bedrooms were was the unsafe place. What I do remember is that everything that happened was always in that hallway and the two bedrooms. I remember hearing footsteps and things moving around. And I also remember that the very back bedroom was the worst. That's the room that we would wake up in with unexplained bruises. I remember hearing the footsteps and things moving within the hallway and rooms. I would always hide my head so that I didn't see anything, and I remember being absolutely terrified in that house. My sister and I had such bad feelings about what was happening that we ended up sharing the same bedroom and refusing to set foot in the other room. This is a style of story that I have seen repeated so many times among so many children who are now adults that have submitted stories of these viscerally terrifying experiences where in some cases they don't necessarily remember the entirety of the story, but they remember so strongly the way it made them feel. And I think that's something that is often dismissed when people are telling ghost stories or telling just stories of their own experiences with spirits as a whole, is that if they don't have all of the details, their story is simply dismissed. But we remember feelings much more than we remember details. And especially as children, we're growing up so quickly, we're experiencing so many things that the finer details get lost, but the visceral, awful feelings stick with us. And especially here, I mean, you've got two children here who are experiencing the same things. And this very much to me is at the very least, high energy environment. So it could well have been that something has occurred in this part of the house before this family moved in that is causing these really, really horrible feelings. And especially if we're talking about hiding heads, we are talking potentially about activity that is visual. So this isn't just, say, the footsteps. I don't know more about this story, but this very well could have been things that could be visually seen, things moving in real time. So usually when we have things moving, it's usually you put something in one place, you leave the room, you come back and it's in a completely different place. Or in some cases, you have things that are even more extreme where you have, say, like Lego that's like all over the floor, and then you leave and you come back and the Lego has been stacked in such a way that a child could never have done it, and the house has been completely locked up and no one else has been in there, but the Lego is like stacked. We see this with chairs being stacked on top of tables, things balancing on top of other things. We see this quite a lot. And so the fact that there's a level of hiding your head so you can't see anything, it makes me think that there's perhaps some visual activity going on here as well, which means this is a very, very, very strong energy place. Now, I would be interested, obviously I don't know and I'm not going to ask, but I would be curious to know whether if you were to ask the parents now, whether they actually experienced stuff, but they weren't sharing it, because that's another thing that commonly happens is the children are really, really scared in a particular property and the parents pretend like nothing is happening. Now, obviously, in some cases, the parents might genuinely not know what's happening, but I do find it interesting that in some cases, the adult children will go to the parents afterwards and they will ask, and the parents will be like, oh yeah, that place was awful. We just didn't want to scare you. So this could be an active haunting. So this could be an active spirit that's in that space. We could also be looking at something here where it is activity that is repeating, or it could be high energy. That's where the most reactions are had. Ghosts, especially things like poltergeists, love energy. They love reactions. That's why fear is something that is really commonly done. Like they try to elicit fear in other people. And so children are going to have a much stronger reaction. They're much likely to see things, experience things. They're much more sensitive. And they're also scared when they're alone. And so therefore, being in a children's bedroom is a really, really good way to elicit fear to get the energy that you want. Either way, terrifying experience. And I'm wondering as well if the people who have moved in since, because it sounds like you're not there anymore, also experience the weird things. And then the last one today is the longest one submitted of the three, but it is well worth the wait. It is super duper fascinating and ridiculously creepy. This one was submitted by Jess. Back in 2008, I was on holiday with my ex-boyfriend and his family in a countryside cottage in Wales. It was a lovely, sunny, autumnal evening. We were sat outside, watching the sunset, playing board games, and as it was getting darker, we decided to head in for the night. Just to note, this cottage was in the middle of nowhere, with no neighbours for a good 2 to 3 miles, with only the farmer who owns the property nearby. There were sheep and cows grazing, but apart from that, not a soul in sight. No campsites, public paths, or farms. As I was getting ready for bed, I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth and was dilly-dallying, thinking of what we were planning to do the next day. I looked up, and through the bathroom's frosted glass, I saw a completely white, humanoid figure slowly walking by, from left to right. I completely froze, and it was like it sensed my shock. It slowly turned around in my direction. The sky had gone dark, and it was nighttime by this point. Plus, I don't remember there being lots of moonlight, and there was no light pollution either. So this figure was very much white against the night. I'll be honest, I would think I was going crazy if I was by myself, but my ex also walked in to brush his teeth and was mid-sentence when he stopped and went, "Oh God, what is that?" We both stood still and held our breath as the figure then started slowly walking up, closer to the window. Even through the frosted glass, I could make out its features, although it didn't have eyes, just black sockets. It absolutely chilled me to the bone, and my fight or flight didn't kick in at all. I just stood, frozen in place. It peered for a good 30 seconds at us. During this time, my ex's sister walks in after us and starts screaming for her dad. We watch the figure slowly back away and walk away to the right and disappear from the window's view. It was then that I felt the panic kick in and started asking my guides and higher powers to please place a shield of protection over the cottage and around us. When I was little, I'd seen a few spirits, including an old family friend with her dog, which brought me comfort rather than fear. But this was something else. My ex's dad goes to look with a torch while his mum calls the farmer to tell them what had happened. The farmer comes out and looks around to check, as this has apparently happened before, to previous visitors. Overall, he was out looking for an hour and a half, but nothing was found. His parents were so unsettled by this, because not only did I see it, but both their children did too. So we all left the next morning and we stayed in a hotel in the town a bit further away for a few nights. I'll never forget that experience, and it's permanently seared into my mind. Let's just say that night we all couldn't sleep, and his sister came in with us. She was young because she was too scared. I felt safer once we were gone. It was never spoken of again by the family, but I have told my family and my fiancé, who all shivered and felt the energy from the experience. It's not something I'd rush in to experience again. I agree. I also feel the full body chills. That is something I actually can't explain. And while I am not one to say that I can fully explain all ghostly encounters with some kind of spiritual being or some explanation, I have read a lot of ghost stories and experienced a lot myself. And yet this is something that I have never and would never want to experience myself. So I am going to open this up to all of my lovely viewers and listeners. Do you have any idea what kind of spirit this could have been in Wales? Any idea at all? I am going to be doing some research on this because I need to know. That story has got to be the most unsettling story that we have had on this series so far. I think that is by far the most disturbing, because a lot of the stories that we have, the spirit is either purposefully trying to cause fear, and so they are very, very present, so they're in a room, or a spirit is just existing and they don't know that what they're doing is going to cause fear, and they are just going about their business. This spirit is different to me, because they are obviously a regular on this property and they are aware that people are staying in that place. And it's the slow approach to the window that is, it makes me feel so uncomfortable, because it's that slow approach to the window that shows that this is not a passive spirit. This is not a spirit that doesn't realize that they're dead. This isn't a spiritual being that is just existing on that property and minding their own business. This is a spirit that is actively 100% aware of the people in the physical plane that are residing in that space. So a lot of spirits are not really aware of the physical plane. They're just on the spiritual plane and they're just doing their own thing. It just so happens that sometimes we're able to see them. This is obviously a spirit that is actively aware, or a spiritual being, should I say, that is actively aware of the physical plane and the people within it. They are willing to be brazen and approach and engage. And it has happened often enough that the farmer is aware of its occurrence, which means that enough people who aren't sensitive to spirits have reported this, that it has been brought to their attention, which is so unusual, because often highly sensitive people will see things physically like this, but other people won't. So to have multiple people at the same time experience the same thing, and not all of them are spiritual, to then have it happen previously to the point where people have reported it as though it is a physical incident, that is actually terrifying. Like, actually. And I have this deep memory, this deep recollection of a being, a particular being that is kind of like, they kind of look like a living corpse, but I have no idea why that has come to my attention, and I have no idea what it's called. So I am going to have to do some serious digging on this, and maybe I'll have to do a little bit of an update episode with some more information, because that is disturbing, and that only goes to cement the initial point of this entire episode, which is to show that if we are alone and we experience things, it can make us feel like we are going crazy. It can make us feel as though we are overtired, or we're sick, or we're seeing things, or something. But when you experience things around one person, around an entire group of people, you get to a point where no amount of rationalization is able to pick apart what you are experiencing. And that's the point where so many people become believers of hauntings and ghosts and spirits. And it really goes to kind of circle back around to the reason why I picked these stories out in the first place. And that is that if you were alone, you could pass off some of these as being your own imagination, a person, you getting sick, you going crazy, something happening in your life. But when there's one other person experiencing it, or two, or more, quite quickly you have a belief system shaking experience where even if at the end of the day you don't believe in ghosts, you have to admit you saw something really weird, and no matter how hard you try to explain it, you cannot fully explain it away. So I want to say a massive thank you to my subscribers and listeners who have submitted these stories today. If you would like to submit your own and have them in their own episode, that will be linked in the description box. If you like these ghosty stories, let me know by giving a like, leaving some little ghost emojis in the comment section. And if you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. I'm going to try to do more of these in the future. I'm even tempted to turn them into a podcast audio format for people who just want to listen and get freaked out while they're driving, or cleaning, or any of the other things that you do whilst listening to me talk, you crazy people. And so with that being said, I hope you have a marvellous magical day. I hope you sleep well tonight and don't see any strange figures approaching your windows, human or otherwise, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!